Not a sound should move. Sergeant Logan Hayes whispered under the pale flicker of the streetlights as Shadow pressed his body against the hood of the silent police car, amber eyes fixed on the darkened interior as if listening to secrets hidden from the world. Rain-slicked asphalt reflected the dim glow of the overhead lamps, casting small pools of trembling light that mirrored every subtle movement of the Marine and his K-9 companion. Logan's boots squelched softly with each cautious step, his rain-drenched jacket clinging to his frame, water dripping from the brim of his hat and running down the collar. The city street was empty, except for the soft hum of distant traffic far enough away that it felt like another world, and the occasional distant siren that faded before it could reach them, leaving only the whisper of falling rain and the faint metallic tang of wet concrete in the air. Shadow remained rigid, tail low but tense, ears twitching at the slightest sound from the vehicle, nose lifted slightly to capture the scent of something unusual within, an urgency that no human words could convey. Logan crouched beside him, the flashlight in his hand cutting a narrow triangle of light across the vehicle, illuminating streaks of water and a faint fingerprint smudged on the passenger window, barely visible but enough to suggest a recent presence. The silence seemed almost oppressive, each heartbeat echoing in his ears as he observed the faint reflection of the street lamp in the puddles, shadows moving subtly across the frame of the police car as if the night itself was holding its breath. Officer Maria Chen's figure appeared momentarily in the corner of his eye, pausing beneath a flickering awning, and Logan did not move, sensing that any sudden action could disrupt the fragile balance maintained by Shadow's instinct. The K-9 shifted slightly, his body language precise, guiding Logan without a single bark, signaling that the discovery inside was urgent and delicate. Logan's fingers traced the edges of the car door, noting the absence of fingerprints on the handle but the faint smudges along the panels that suggested someone had leaned, paused, and left. The gentle tapping of a loose antenna from a previous patrol unit created a soft rhythm against the car, blending with the rain like a subtle metronome, reminding Logan that time, though slowed in observation, was still moving forward. He adjusted the beam of the flashlight, the narrow circle sweeping across the interior as he glimpsed faint outlines of a radio and scattered papers, shadows masking more than revealing, teasing the truth just beyond reach. Shadow's paw nudged Logan's knee softly, a silent insistence that he act with care, that the solution lay in patience as much as in observation. The distant sound of tires rolling on wet asphalt reached their ears, but the vehicle did not move, parked as if waiting for them to notice the details, to follow the cues left behind by hands and voices now absent. Logan exhaled slowly, letting the chill of the rain seep into his lungs and settle him, focusing on the tiny flicker of light reflecting from a sheet of laminated paper within, a signal of something important, a trace of communication long delayed. The night air carried the faint aroma of wet pine from nearby trees, mingling with the synthetic scent of rain on asphalt and the subtle chemical tang of the vehicle interior, a combination that sharpened Logan's senses, heightening the alertness that had been honed through years of service and countless missions. Shadow lowered his head momentarily, then lifted it, eyes glinting with intelligence, anticipation, and resolve, as if silently confirming that Logan's next move would reveal a hidden truth that could not wait. Logan reached for the door handle carefully, mindful of every detail, every subtle vibration of the metal beneath his fingers, feeling the cool slickness of rainwater and the faint resistance of the lock mechanism that had protected the secret inside. Each breath, each heartbeat, each drop of water sliding down the windshield became a measure of patience and attention, a reminder that the smallest actions often determine the difference between discovery and oversight. The mist rising from the wet asphalt curled softly around their feet, wrapping the street in a quiet shroud that made every movement feel suspended in time, and Logan understood, as he knelt beside Shadow, that the night held more than darkness. It held the beginning of revelation, a truth waiting patiently for those attentive enough to notice, for those brave enough to follow the subtle guidance of a loyal companion. Logan did not open the door right away. He had learned, through years of hard weather and harder decisions, that the first answer was rarely the whole truth. He stayed crouched beside Shadow, one knee pressed into the wet street, the flashlight angled low so its beam would not glare against the glass. The police car sat at the curb beneath the broken rhythm of the street lamp, black and white paint shining under the rain, empty at first glance, ordinary to anyone passing by too fast. But nothing about Shadow felt ordinary. The German shepherd stood with his front paws planted near the passenger door, his nose hovering inches from the seam where the window met the frame, taking in the air with slow, deliberate breaths. He was not frantic. He was not confused. He was certain. That certainty moved through Logan like a hand on his shoulder. Across the sidewalk, Officer Maria Chin stepped out from beneath the awning, her dark raincoat beaded with water, one hand lifted in warning but not command. "Sergeant Hayes," she said carefully, "that vehicle belongs to Officer Daniel Price. Dispatch lost contact with him about 20 minutes ago, but we were told to wait for county supervisors before touching anything." Logan kept his gaze on the car. "Who gave that order?" Maria hesitated just long enough for the rain to fill the space between them. "Captain Reeves." Shadow's ears turned at the name, not because he knew the man, but because he knew Maria's voice had changed. Logan heard it too. The smallest break. The kind people make when they are following an instruction their conscience does not trust. He rose slowly, water sliding from his sleeves, and looked through the passenger window. A folded map lay on the seat. A paper coffee cup sat untouched in the holder. The dashboard screen was dark, but the radio console beneath it gave off the faintest pulse of green light, dim as a firefly trapped behind glass. Logan leaned closer. There was no engine sound, no movement, only the rain, the antenna tapping, and a barely audible crackle from inside the car, like static trying to become a voice. Shadow lifted one paw and placed it against the lower edge of the door. Then he looked at Logan, not at Maria, not at the empty street. "Logan, you hear it too," Logan whispered. Maria came closer now, her expression tightening as the static rose for half a second, then vanished again. "That radio should be off," she said. Logan did not answer. His eyes moved over the vehicle the way they had once moved over desert roads and abandoned buildings, not searching for danger, but for meaning. The rear tire had splashed through mud recently, even though the street behind them was clean pavement for nearly half a mile. A pine needle clung to the back bumper, fresh and green, the kind that did not belong downtown. On the driver's side mirror, rainwater had washed away most of the surface dust, but one narrow streak remained, as if someone had wiped it with a sleeve. Shadow followed the same trail, nose lowering toward the curb, then back to the door, assembling the night through scent while Logan assembled it through sight. "This car was not parked here long," Logan said. Maria swallowed. "No, it was not." A gust of wind pushed rain under the street lamp, and for 1 second the interior glowed pale enough for Logan to see something tucked beneath the radio panel. A small recorder. Not police issue. Its red light blinked once, then went dark. Shadow gave a soft whine, the sound low and urgent, and nudged the door again. Maria reached for her radio, then stopped when it sputtered with interference. Every channel hissed. No voices came through. "That is not right," she said. Logan turned toward her, steady and calm. "Do you have a key?" Maria looked down the empty street, then back at the car. Duty fought hesitation in her face. Rules were written for order, but sometimes mercy arrived before permission. She pulled a key ring from her pocket and held it out, her hand damp from rain. "I will log it as an emergency access." Logan took the keys but paused when Shadow stepped back, then circled toward the front of the cruiser. The dog pressed his nose near the grill, sniffed once, and sat. Not at the passenger door anymore. The front. Logan followed the movement and aimed his flashlight through the windshield. The beam caught the radio microphone hanging slightly crooked, its cord stretched taut toward the floorboard. Beneath it, barely visible under the steering column, was a strip of gray fabric tied around the cord, the kind of field marker a first responder might use when words were not safe or time was too short. Maria's breath caught. "Daniel used those during search drills," she whispered. "He only tied them when he needed someone to follow a clue." The static inside the car crackled again, longer this time. A voice tried to surface, broken by rain and distance. Not enough to understand. Enough to make Shadow stand. Logan slid the key into the passenger lock with careful hands. The mechanism clicked softly, almost respectfully, and the door opened just a few inches. Warm, Stale air breathed out from inside, carrying the scent of coffee, damp canvas, pine sap, and something Logan recognized from every urgent night he had ever lived through. Fear held back by discipline. Shadow did not jump in. He waited at Logan's side, eyes bright, body still. Logan opened the door wider, and the radio crackled once more. This time, through the static, a man's voice came through, faint but unmistakable, speaking only 3 words before the signal collapsed again. "Find the boy." Logan Hayes carefully lifted the passenger door fully open, the hinges creaking softly under the weight of the rain-slicked metal, and Shadow remained at his side, alert, ears rotating to catch the faintest sound from within. The interior of the police car smelled of damp vinyl, wet leather, and the faint aroma of coffee left hours ago, mingling with the rain that had seeped through the slightly ajar windows. Logan's flashlight beams swept over the dashboard and seats, illuminating a radio console with static flickering on its small display, a recorder wedged neatly beneath the steering column, and a folded sheet of paper with a partial log of police messages scrawled in careful handwriting. Shadow's nose twitched as he caught a faint scent, low and urgent, leading Logan to notice a pair of small footprints on the wet carpet, slightly smeared as though someone had stepped lightly, trying not to leave a trace. Logan crouched closer, noting the careful placement of items in the vehicle, each object a signal, a deliberate breadcrumb left for someone attentive enough to see, a puzzle only Shadow's instincts had brought him to. The wind shifted through the street, carrying the scent of wet pine and asphalt, curling around the vehicle and soaking into Logan's jacket, but he barely noticed, his mind focused entirely on assembling the subtle clues. Maria Chun hovered nearby, hands folded over her raincoat, eyes wide as she peered at the small recorder, the blinking red light now faint but persistent, like a heartbeat hidden in static. Logan gingerly lifted the device, brushing rainwater from its surface, noting the barely legible label that marked it as evidence from a prior patrol, yet now repurposed in a way that suggested urgency, secrecy, and reliance on someone willing to pay attention. Shadow leaned forward, resting a paw lightly on the seat edge, eyes flicking between the faint movements of the rain-streaked dashboard and Logan's hands, guiding him silently. The static on the radio shifted, a faint voice breaking through for a moment, interrupted by interference and rain, just enough to make Logan pause and listen intently. The whisper of the words, incomplete but meaningful, hinted at a location, a direction, and an urgency, telling him more than any normal transmission could. Logan's heart quickened as he folded the recorder into his jacket pocket, ensuring it stayed dry, while still keeping the flashlight steady, revealing another detail, a small pin mark on the folded sheet, almost invisible, pointing toward a route behind the abandoned clinic. Shadow pressed closer, nose low to the wet floor mat, signaling that the trail was genuine, and Logan felt the familiar surge of adrenaline tempered by calm focus, the kind that comes from years of trusting instincts honed in impossible circumstances. Rain continued to drip from the roof, pooling in corners and running along the metal seams, carrying subtle smells of wet paint and old upholstery, each element a thread in the tapestry of discovery. Logan glanced at Maria Chun, whose expression had shifted from caution to quiet understanding, recognizing the significance of what they had found without words. Outside, the street remained empty, mist curling along the asphalt, reflecting the intermittent glow of distant traffic lights, casting an ethereal illumination over the scene. Logan finally exhaled, steadying his hands, and looked at Shadow, who met his gaze with amber eyes unwavering, patient, and alert. Together they had found more than just clues. They had uncovered a message, left in silence, for those attentive enough to notice, a hidden signal that carried with it a responsibility, a promise, and a path forward through the rain-soaked night, toward the resolution of an unseen urgency, toward the truth waiting just beyond the mist and the shadows. The 3 words hung inside the police car long after the signal disappeared, small and broken, yet heavy enough to change the air around them. Find the boy. Logan did not repeat them aloud. He did not need to. Maria Chun had heard them too, and the look on her face told him those words had opened a door in her memory that she wished had never been closed. Shadow stepped away from the passenger seat and lowered his nose to the floorboard, moving with slow precision, not searching randomly, but following the invisible trail that only scent could draw. Logan watched him carefully, knowing better than to interrupt. The dog sniffed near the damp carpet, then the edge of the center console, then the strip of gray fabric tied around the microphone cord. When Shadow reached the fabric, he froze. His ears lifted. His breathing changed. Logan crouched beside him and touched the strip gently. It was not just a marker. There was something written on the inside fold, protected from the rain and barely visible in the weak light. 3 numbers. 214. Maria leaned closer, her voice nearly swallowed by the rain. That is not a badge number. Logan turned the fabric in his fingers. Could be a street address. Could be a unit. Could be a mile marker. Maria's eyes moved toward the folded map on the seat. Officer Price used paper maps when he wanted a backup trail. He said batteries fail, but ink keeps talking. Logan picked up the map and opened it across the dashboard, using his flashlight to hold down one corner. The city grid of Charleston spread before them in pale blue lines and rain-darkened creases. A red circle had been drawn near the edge of an old industrial waterfront, close to a storage road that ran behind a closed seafood warehouse. Next to it, written in the same careful hand, were the numbers 214. Shadow gave one quiet breath through his nose, as if confirming what the paper could not say. Maria reached for her radio again, but static answered first, sharp and empty. "Dispatch, this is Officer Chun. I need units to check Harbor Service Road, near Building 214. Nothing returned. Only hiss. Logan looked past the windshield at the empty street, where the rain had softened into mist and the far lamps blurred like candles underwater. Someone is blocking the signal, he said, calm but certain. Maria swallowed, then nodded. That road is a dead zone on good nights. If Daniel was out there, he might have driven back until the radio caught one last bounce. Logan folded the map and slipped it into his jacket. Then he left Shadow here to make sure somebody listened. At the sound of his name, Shadow turned toward the street and stood straighter, body angled east, toward the river. The decision was already made. Maria hesitated only once, looking at the unattended cruiser, the broken channel, the order to wait. Then she closed the passenger door and said, "My patrol sport utility vehicle is around the corner." They moved fast, but not recklessly, footsteps splashing through shallow puddles, Shadow keeping close at Logan's side, his dark coat shining under the streetlights. The city seemed to fall away block by block as they drove toward the waterfront, Maria behind the wheel, Logan in the passenger seat with the map open on his knees, Shadow steady in the back, nose lifted toward the cracked window. Charleston at night had a way of holding its breath near the water. Houses gave way to low warehouses, then chain-link fences, then long stretches of pavement silvered by rain. The smell changed too, from wet brick and oak leaves to salt water, diesel, and old rope. Logan watched the mile markers pass, each one bringing the red circle closer. He thought of Officer Daniel Price, somewhere in this same darkness, leaving clues instead of panic, trusting that someone would understand. He thought of the boy, unknown, unseen, reduced to 3 words carried through static. Find the boy. Not rescue me. Not send help to me. Find the boy. That told Logan everything about the kind of officer Daniel Price was. Shadow suddenly stood in the back seat, paws braced, ears forward. Maria slowed. Ahead, Harbor Service Road appeared between 2 rusted signs, narrow and unlit, bending toward the black outline of the warehouses. Building 214 sat at the end, its loading dock facing the water, windows dark, roofline barely visible against the low gray sky. No vehicles moved. No voices carried. Only the quiet slap of water against pilings and the soft rattle of rain in the weeds. Maria turned off the headlights before they reached the bend, letting the vehicle roll to a gentle stop near a stack of empty pallets. Logan opened his door carefully. Shadow slipped out without a sound, then paused, nose to the wind. He did not bark. He looked back once, amber eyes catching the faint light from the dashboard. Then he lowered his head and began moving toward the loading dock, following a trail no one else could see. Logan stepped after him, the map folded in his hand, Maria close behind with her flashlight low. Every board creak, every water drop from the roof, every distant gull cry felt too loud. At the base of the loading dock, Shadow stopped beside a child's small red backpack, soaked from the rain, leaning against the wall as if it had been placed there carefully, not dropped. Logan crouched and read the name written on the plastic tag. Alex Parker. The air seemed to thin. Maria covered her mouth with one hand, then pointed toward the warehouse door where another strip of gray fabric had been tied around the handle. Logan stood slowly, feeling the night gather itself around them. The final radio message had not been the end of the trail. It had been the beginning. Logan Hayes stepped carefully toward the warehouse door, the rain forming tiny streams along the edges of the corrugated metal, each drop tracing the outline of years of rust and wear, and Shadow stayed close. Ears up, tail low but stiff, every movement deliberate and measured. The air smelled faintly of salt water from the nearby harbor, mixed with wet timber, oil, and the lingering scent of rain-soaked asphalt from the street behind them. Logan's flashlight swept across the dock, revealing stacks of empty pallets, coiled ropes, and scattered crates, each one casting long, shifting shadows that flickered across the walls and floor. Maria Chun followed silently, holding her flashlight close to the ground to avoid glaring into Logan's eyes and to keep the illumination focused on the trail of subtle hints left by Officer Daniel Price. Shadow paused near a small pile of debris, nose brushing a damp footprint, one small and light, unmistakably made by a child. Logan crouched, examining the imprint, noting the precise depth and angle, recognizing that someone had stepped carefully to avoid leaving evidence, but that the dog's instincts had detected it regardless. The final radio message echoed in his memory, not as words but as intent, and he realized that every step they took now was guided by the trace of that urgency, the invisible path connecting the dispatcher, Daniel, and the unseen child, Alex Parker. A soft metallic click came from inside the warehouse door, almost imperceptible, but enough to make Logan freeze mid-step. Shadow's ears flicked forward, muscles coiled, body signaling that they were not alone, but that this presence was deliberate and controlled. Maria shifted slightly, eyes scanning the perimeter, acknowledging without words the need for caution, awareness, and patience. Logan reached the handle of the warehouse door and felt the faint vibration through the metal, subtle and rhythmic, as though the building itself had been holding its breath for this moment. He inhaled slowly, the air cool and damp, carrying the sharp scent of salt and wet wood, and turned the handle with the utmost care, easing the door just enough to peek inside. The interior was dark but not empty. Crates were stacked unevenly, leaving narrow paths, shadows hiding deeper corners, and a small light flickered near the far wall, illuminating a backpack placed gently on the floor, wet from the rain but upright, as if waiting. Shadow sniffed at the backpack and whined softly, pressing against Logan's side in a way that was not alarm but affirmation. Logan stepped inside, feet careful on the wet concrete, and saw the small red backpack marked with the name Alex Parker. His hands hovered over it, not touching, allowing Shadow to guide the attention toward the subtle clue left beside it. A strip of gray fabric tied neatly around a metal beam, the same type used to mark a trail. Maria shone her flashlight on the fabric, recognizing the pattern from training drills, understanding that it was meant to be followed, not touched, a breadcrumb left for those paying attention. Logan picked up the folded map again from his jacket, aligning the numbers 214 with the faint grid lines visible on the warehouse floor, noting the path Daniel had intended them to trace. Outside, the mist had thinned slightly, but the distant harbor noises, gulls calling, and gentle slap of water against pilings added a tense rhythm to their movements. Logan crouched beside Shadow and whispered, "Stay with me," and the dog leaned closer, attentive, eyes flicking between the backpack and the warehouse exit. Every sensory detail, the faint smell of diesel, wet rope, the metallic tang of the warehouse, the dripping of rainwater from the eaves, added to the clarity of their mission. The soft static from the radio intermittently came through Logan's portable receiver, a faint signal guiding them toward the next step, while the original message, "Find the boy," remained in his mind as a compass. Step by step, crate by crate, they advanced, reading subtle clues. Scuff marks on the floor, small indentations in the wet concrete, an abandoned pair of gloves, all leading to a corner where faint echoes of movement hinted at Alex's presence nearby. Logan's heart raced quietly, not with fear, but with anticipation, knowing that every careful observation, every reliance on Shadow's instincts, and every measured decision had brought them to the edge of resolution. Shadow paused once more, nose to the ground, tail still, signaling that the boy was close, that their perseverance had uncovered the invisible path, and that the final radio message, faint though it had been, had not just directed them. It had saved time, focus, and ultimately a life, preparing them for the moment when Alex Parker would finally be found safely. Shadow stopped so suddenly that Logan almost stepped past him. The German shepherd stood at the mouth of a narrow aisle between stacked crates, his head lowered, his body perfectly still, his amber eyes fixed on the dark corner ahead. Logan raised one hand to signal Maria Chen to pause, and the warehouse seemed to answer with silence. Rain tapped the metal roof in soft, uneven rhythms. Water dripped from a broken gutter outside, falling into a puddle with a hollow sound that echoed through the loading bay. The air smelled of salt, wet rope, cardboard, and old wood, but beneath those ordinary harbor scents was something smaller, warmer, human. Logan felt the shift before he understood it. Shadow knew. Somewhere ahead, past the crates marked with faded shipping labels and the coils of thick marine rope, the trail had ended. Maria held her flashlight low, letting the beam spread across the floor instead of cutting too sharply into the darkness. The light found another strip of gray fabric tied around a pipe, then a small scuff mark in the dust, then a child-sized sneaker print near a stack of folded tarps. Logan crouched, his breath steady, his voice gentler than the rain. "Alex," he called softly. "My name is Logan. I am here with Officer Chen. We are here to help." No answer came at first. Only the roof, the water, the slow breathing of the dog beside him. Shadow moved one step forward, then laid down on the cold concrete, lowering himself so his body looked smaller, softer, less frightening. Logan watched the dog make himself harmless, and something in his chest tightened. There were things training could teach, and then there were things only mercy knew how to do. A faint sound came from behind the tarps. Not a cry, not a word. A small breath pulled in too quickly. Maria's eyes lifted to Logan's. He nodded once, then stayed where he was. "You do not have to come out fast," Logan said. "Take your time. Shadow is right here. He is a good dog." At the sound of his name, Shadow gave the quietest whine, barely more than air. The tarp shifted. A small face appeared in the dim light, pale with cold, streaked with rainwater and dust, eyes wide but focused. Alex Parker could not have been more than 8 years old. He was wearing a blue hoodie, damp at the sleeves, and he clutched a small toy fire truck against his chest like it was the last solid thing in the world. Logan stayed low, hands open where Alex could see them. "There you are," he said, his voice steady. "You did a brave job staying still." Alex looked at Maria, then at Shadow. His lips trembled before he whispered, "Officer Dan told me to hide until the dog came." Maria closed her eyes for one brief second, and when she opened them, they shone in the flashlight glow. Logan felt the meaning of those words settle over them. Officer Daniel Price had not left random clues. He had built a path for a frightened child to survive long enough to be found. He had trusted that Shadow, or someone like Shadow, would finish what he could not. Logan reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out a dry emergency blanket, the silver packet crinkling softly. "I'm going to slide this over to you, Alex. It is just to keep you warm." The boy nodded, barely. Shadow remained on the ground, watching him with patient eyes. Logan slid the blanket across the concrete, and Alex took it with one small hand. Maria spoke into her radio again, moving closer to the open warehouse door where the signal might reach. "Dispatch, this is Officer Chen. We found the child. He is alert. Send medical support to Harbor Service Road, Building 214. Static answered first. Then a broken voice came through, faint but real. "Copy, Officer Chen. Units en route." The words seemed to loosen the warehouse walls. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the distant promise of sirens through the harbor mist. Alex unfolded the blanket with clumsy fingers, and Shadow slowly crawled forward, inch by inch, stopping whenever the boy's eyes widened. Finally, Alex reached out and touched the top of Shadow's head. The dog closed his eyes. That was all. No sudden movement. No noise. Just a child's hand resting on wet fur in a dark warehouse while help found its way through rain. Logan swallowed hard and looked toward the far end of the aisle, where another object sat half hidden beneath a crate. A police radio, its casing scratched, its battery light almost gone. Beside it lay a note folded under a small metal flashlight. Maria picked it up with careful hands and read the message in a whisper. If this reaches anyone, tell his mother he stayed brave. Tell them the boy believed the dog would come. Logan turned back to Alex, who now had both hands in Shadow's fur, the emergency blanket shining around his shoulders like a small silver cloak. The final message had not changed everything because it revealed danger. It changed everything because it revealed faith. A police officer had left a trail. A child had held on. A Marine had listened. And a dog, silent beneath the rain, had carried hope the last few hundred feet. The first sirens reached the waterfront as a thin blue shimmer beyond the warehouse windows, soft at first, then brighter, spreading across the rain-streaked glass like dawn arriving early. Alex Parker heard them and tightened both hands in Shadow's fur, not from fear anymore, but from the sudden release that comes when a child realizes he no longer has to be brave alone. Logan Hayes stayed crouched a few feet away, keeping his voice low and steady, letting the boy hold on to the dog as long as he needed. Maria Chun moved toward the open loading bay, one hand raised to guide the arriving officers, her other hand still holding the folded note from Officer Daniel Price. She did not read it again. She did not have to. The words had already settled inside the warehouse, quiet and permanent, like a promise carved into the rain. Shadow remained beside Alex, wet coat dark against the silver emergency blanket around the boy's shoulders, his amber eyes half closed but alert to every sound. The German shepherd had done what he had been trained to do, and something more than training too. He had waited beside a silent car. He had listened to a broken signal. He had followed a trail no human eye could see. Now he lay beside the child, as if the entire night had led to this single act of stillness. Logan glanced toward the police radio on the floor, its battery light almost gone, and felt the weight of the final message differently now. Find the boy. 3 words, but inside them lived an officer's courage, a mother's coming relief, a child's patience, and a dog's faithful purpose. Outside, tires hissed over wet pavement. Doors opened. Boots splashed through shallow puddles. Voices called through the mist, careful, professional, restrained. Maria answered them with quiet instructions, guiding paramedics first, then backup officers, then a supervisor who arrived without the loud authority Logan had expected. Perhaps the rain had humbled everyone. Perhaps the sight inside the warehouse did. The paramedics entered slowly, carrying a medical bag and a warm blanket, their faces softening when they saw Alex pressed against Shadow. "Hey, buddy," one of them said gently. "We are going to check you out, all right?" Alex looked at Logan before answering. Logan nodded once. "They are here to help. Shadow will stay right here." That was enough. The boy allowed the paramedics to kneel beside him, allowed them to check his pulse, wrap him in a warmer blanket, and offer him a bottle of water. He spoke in small pieces, never all at once. He had been at the waterfront with Officer Price after a community safety event. He had followed the officer into the warehouse because something about the place felt wrong. Then the power had flickered, the radio signal had failed, and Officer Price had told him to hide behind the tarps until help came. Not until people came. Until the dog came. Alex said that part twice, softly, as if he was still trying to understand why the officer had believed it so deeply. Logan looked at Shadow, who rested his chin on the concrete, accepting the boy's fingers between his ears. He knew dogs listen when people stop hearing, Logan said. Maria turned away at that, but not before Logan saw her wipe rain from her cheek, though they were standing under a roof. The warehouse lights flickered once as a portable generator outside came alive, revealing the space more clearly now. The wet footprints, the gray fabric markers, the backpack, the careful trail of clues leading from the police car to this corner. Nothing looked dramatic in full light. That was what moved Logan most. Sometimes grace did not look like a thunderclap. Sometimes it looked like a map, a strip of fabric, a loyal dog lying still, and a frightened boy who kept breathing until someone found him. A second police vehicle arrived, and an older woman stepped out before it had fully stopped. Alex saw her through the open bay doors and made a sound that was almost his mother's name, but broke in the middle. The paramedic helped him stand, but he did not need much help once he saw her. She rushed across the dock with her coat open and her hair loosened by the rain. stopping only long enough to let the paramedic guide her safely around the equipment. Then she knelt and wrapped her arms around her son, careful but desperate, as if she was trying to confirm with touch that he was real. Alex buried his face against her shoulder, still holding the toy fire truck in one hand. Shadow stood then, slowly, and stepped back to give them room. Logan saw that and felt his throat tighten. The dog had guarded the boy until the mother arrived. Then, without needing praise, he moved aside. Maria approached Logan with the folded note sealed in a clear evidence sleeve. "They found Officer Price," she said quietly. "He is alive. Exhausted, but alive." He kept moving until he could get the cruiser close enough for the radio to bounce the message out. Logan closed his eyes for one breath, letting the news pass through him. No speech, no salute, just gratitude. Across the warehouse, Alex's mother looked up through tears and saw a shadow standing beside Logan. "Was that the dog?" she asked. Alex nodded against her shoulder. "He came." The mother pressed one hand to her mouth, then reached toward Shadow. The German shepherd stepped forward, calm as morning, and let her touch his wet head. She whispered thank you, but the words seemed too small for what had happened. Maybe all true gratitude feels that way. Outside, the storm finally thinned into a mist, and the first pale line of morning appeared over the harbor, turning the water silver. Logan stood beside Shadow at the edge of the loading dock, watching officers gather evidence and paramedics lead Alex and his mother toward the waiting ambulance. The final message had changed everything, but not because it had solved the mystery by itself. It had asked the right souls to listen. And in the hush after the storm, Logan understood that some messages do not end when the radio goes silent. They keep traveling through rain, through loyalty, through the steady heartbeat of a dog who refuses to leave until everyone is home. The ambulance carrying Alex Parker and his mother rolled away from Harbor Service Road just as the rain became fine enough to look like mist under the warehouse lights. Logan Hayes watched it go with Shadow seated beside him, the German shepherd's wet fur catching the pale blue flash of the emergency lights until they disappeared around the bend. For the first time all night, no one was shouting, rushing, or listening through static. The harbor returned slowly to itself. Water tapped against the pilings. A gull cried somewhere beyond the dark edge of the docks. The wind moved through hanging chains and loose plastic sheets with a sound like tired breathing. Maria Chin stood a few feet away, speaking softly with the supervisor who had arrived from County Dispatch, her face drawn with exhaustion but steadier now. The note from Officer Daniel Price had been sealed. The backpack had been photographed and collected. The gray strips of fabric had been marked one by one, each small sign honored as part of the path that led to the boy. Logan looked at them and felt a strange reverence. They were not dramatic things. Torn cloth, ink on paper, a fading radio battery, a child's red backpack. Yet each had carried hope forward when voices could not. Shadow rose without command and walked toward the open warehouse door. Logan followed, because by then he understood that the dog was not finished. Inside, the air was colder than before, no longer filled with urgency, only the damp smell of concrete, salt, and cardboard. Portable work lights cast long shadows across the floor, revealing the trail more clearly now that fear had loosened its hold. Shadow paused near the place where Alex had hidden, lowered his nose, and sniffed the concrete once, then stepped toward the old police radio that still lay beneath the crate where Logan had first seen it. Its battery light was nearly gone, pulsing faintly, barely alive. Maria came in behind them and stood still when she saw it. "We should turn it off," she said, but her voice made it sound like a question. Logan knelt beside the radio. Rainwater had dried in streaks across the casing, and the speaker grill was scratched from being dragged or dropped, but the unit still held on, as if unwilling to surrender until the right person heard what remained. He pressed the playback button on the small recorder they had found in the cruiser. Static filled the warehouse first, soft and uneven. Then Officer Daniel Price's voice came through, low and strained by exhaustion, but calm in a way that made the room grow quiet. "This is Officer Price. If anyone finds this, the child is not alone. I moved him where the wind would not reach him. He has a red backpack and a toy fire truck." He answered to Alex. "He did everything I asked. He stayed brave." The recording crackled, and Maria covered her mouth with her hand. Logan did not move. Shadow sat beside him, ears forward, listening as though the voice belonged to someone he had guarded all his life. The message continued after a pause. My radio is failing. The cruiser may carry one last transmission if I can get close enough to the main road. If Shadow is there, trust him. He knows the scent from the youth center demonstration. He liked the boy. The boy liked him back. Logan looked down at Shadow then, and the pieces settled into place with a quiet finality. This had not been luck. Earlier that week, at a community event, Alex had met Shadow. The boy had knelt, offered one careful hand, and laughed when the dog leaned into him. Shadow had remembered. Officer Price had known he would. The recording faded again, then returned for one last sentence. Tell his mother that he asked if dogs can be angels. I told him sometimes they are the way God sends help when people are too far away. The recorder clicked off. No one spoke. Outside, dawn began to wash the harbor in a thin gray light, and the warehouse, which had looked so cold an hour before, seemed suddenly less empty. Maria lowered her hand and wiped her cheek with her sleeve. He remembered Shadow, she whispered. Logan rested one hand on the dog's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the damp fur, the steady pulse of a creature who had carried memory like a compass. Shadow remembered him too, he said. A county officer stepped into the doorway and told Maria that Officer Price had been taken to the hospital and was asking about the boy. Maria nodded, but she could not answer right away. Relief had weight too. It could bend a person as surely as grief. Logan picked up the old radio carefully and handed it to the evidence technician, then turned toward the loading dock. Shadow followed him out into the morning. The first sunlight touched the puddles, turning them gold at the edges. Near the dock, Alex's toy fire truck had left a tiny red streak of paint on the concrete, a mark so small most people would never notice. Shadow noticed. He lowered his nose to it, gave one soft breath, and stepped back. Logan understood. The search was over. The promise had been kept. Maria walked up beside them, holding her cap in both hands. I gave the order to wait at the cruiser, she said quietly. I thought I was following protocol. Logan looked toward the road where the ambulance had vanished. You listened when it mattered. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on Shadow. He never stopped listening. The dog stood at the edge of the dock, amber eyes reflecting the first clean light of morning, his body still, his work done without celebration. Logan had seen medals pinned to uniforms, speeches given under flags, names engraved in stone. But sometimes honor looked simpler than that. Sometimes it looked like wet paw prints across a warehouse floor, leading from a silent car to a frightened child, from a broken message to a living answer. And as the harbor woke around them, Logan felt the old ache inside him loosen again, not disappear, but soften, because the night had reminded him that even when radios fail, when roads go dark, when human voices fall into static, loyalty still finds a way to speak. By the time the sun had fully risen over Charleston Harbor, the mist that had clung to the docks lifted into pale streaks of gold and gray, reflecting off the puddles left by the overnight rain. Logan Hayes stood on the edge of the loading dock, Shadow beside him, fur damp but shining, ears still alert, eyes amber and unwavering, watching the morning world awaken in quiet rhythm. The warehouse behind them, once a place of shadow and hidden signals, seemed less oppressive now, its dark corners softened by the diffuse sunlight spilling through broken windows. Alex Parker sat in the waiting ambulance with his mother, wrapped in a warm blanket, small fingers clutching the toy fire truck as if it carried the courage of the night with it. Maria Chun remained outside, coordinating with arriving officers and paramedics, her voice calm, steady, carrying the details of what had transpired so that every agency would understand the careful sequence of actions that had led to the child's safety. Logan observed the harbor beyond the dock, watching the still water reflect the first color of day, the gulls gliding lazily above, and the gentle slap of waves against the pilings. Every detail, from the way the light bent off the wet concrete to the lingering smell of salt, rope, and damp cardboard, reminded him of the journey that had begun with a silent police car and a radio message that seemed almost insignificant until interpreted by those who noticed the small signals. Shadow shifted slightly, stepping toward the edge of the dock, then pausing, tail sweeping lightly on the ground, waiting for Logan to follow. Logan knelt beside him, feeling the solid warmth of the dog's body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and the unspoken understanding that this companion had guided them through every subtle danger, every faint clue, every unanswered call. Alex's mother stepped out of the ambulance after being assured by paramedics that her son was stable, her hands pressed gently against his shoulders, guiding him to walk carefully along the dock, checking that he had hold of the blanket and the toy. Logan followed behind, giving space, allowing Shadow to remain in the lead where he had earned the right to be. The final message from Officer Daniel Price, the 3 words that had begun this search, had carried a weight far beyond any normal transmission. Find the boy. It had demanded attention, intuition, and trust, and every step of the past hours had answered it. The city beyond the harbor began to hum with life, distant traffic soft against the morning light, but the loading dock remained a place suspended in time, where the urgency of the night was slowly giving way to relief. Logan glanced once more at the small red backpack Alex had left behind on the warehouse floor, the subtle scuff marks of his steps faint in the concrete, and felt the lingering gravity of what had been achieved. Not only had the boy been found, but the careful chain of observation, trust, and loyalty had ensured that no detail was missed, that every signal left by those who cared had been read accurately and acted upon. Shadow nudged Logan gently, as if reminding him that the night's work was done, that the purpose had been fulfilled, and yet the vigilance of a guardian was never truly finished. Logan stood, brushing rainwater from his sleeves, and looked at the harbor again, the stillness broken only by the faint cries of gulls and the soft ripples of waves. Maria approached, reporting that all emergency units were confirming the child's safety and that Officer Price had been transported to the hospital, exhausted but alive, to receive care and debrief. Logan nodded, understanding the sequence of events had reached closure. Shadow stepped forward, paused touching the dock lightly, then back toward Logan as if to acknowledge the human effort that had worked alongside instinct and training. The morning air carried the faint scent of damp timber, salt, and fresh rain, a combination that felt cleansing after the tension and darkness of the night. Logan exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle, noting how subtle cues, careful observation, and patient response had led to resolution. Alex Parker now smiled faintly at his mother, the toy fire truck safe in his grasp, the blanket warm around his shoulders, and Logan understood that the night's effort had achieved something far beyond procedure. A life protected, a trust honored, a lesson in quiet courage preserved. Shadow gave one last glance at the warehouse, then at Logan, before settling beside him, still and calm. The harbor glistened, the mist lifted completely, and the first rays of sunlight danced across the water, illuminating the dock, the police cruiser, and the warehouse with a soft golden light that seemed to affirm the quiet heroism of those who had listened, observed, and acted when it mattered most. In that still morning, Logan felt the enduring lesson of loyalty and vigilance, the unseen work that had guided them through the night, and the deep certainty that even small signals, when followed with care, could save lives, restore hope, and bring calm after the storm.